My son-in-law locked me in the catering kitchen. "Stay here until it's over. Your clothes are humiliating." Desperate, I called the son of my former housekeeper, a boy I had once loved like my own. Now he's the CEO of the very company where my son-in-law works. No one knew we were still in contact. When he walked into that hall with 10 bodyguards behind him, no one could have imagined what would happen next. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels. My name is Patty, I'm 65 years old, and I never imagined that at this age I'd be locked in a kitchen like a prisoner, tears running down my cheeks while laughter echoed from the other side of the door. But there I was, shut away in the buffet kitchen at my son-in-law's corporate party, all because Grant decided my outfit was an embarrassment to the family. The evening had started as something that was supposed to be pleasant. My daughter Sarah had invited me to join them at Grant's company's annual celebration. "Mom, this is important for Grant's career," she'd told me over the phone 3 days earlier. "All the executives will be there with their families. It would really mean a lot if you came." I'd been genuinely excited. It had been months since Sarah and I had spent any real time together, and I hoped this evening might help close the growing gap between us. I spent 2 days deciding what to wear. I chose a navy blue dress I'd bought at Walmart for $39 and paired it with my best black shoes, which I polished until they shone. Looking back, I see how naive I was to think that my best would be acceptable in Grant's world. The venue was stunning, far more luxurious than anywhere I'd ever been. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and waiters in spotless white uniforms moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I felt out of place the moment we walked in, but I forced myself to stand tall. I was Sarah's mother, and that should have been enough. For the first hour, everything seemed okay. Grant introduced me to a few coworkers as Sarah's mother, though he never actually used my name. Sarah stayed by my side at first, pointing out different executives and their wives. I tried to make polite conversation, but I could feel the stiff smiles and the quick, assessing looks at my clothes. These women were dressed in designer gowns that probably cost more than my entire monthly Social Security check of $857. The evening shifted when Grant's boss, Mr. Richardson, approached with his wife. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing what I assumed was a very expensive black cocktail dress, her jewelry catching the light with every movement. Grant instantly straightened his posture, his whole attitude transforming into a kind of desperate eagerness to impress. "Mr. Richardson, what an honor," Grant said, practically bowing. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Sarah." Sarah smiled graciously and shook hands with both of them. Then Grant's eyes landed on me, and I saw something harden in his expression. It was a look I'd come to recognize in the 5 years he'd been married to my daughter, a mix of embarrassment and barely suppressed irritation. "And this is—" Grant hesitated, his voice trailing off as though he wasn't sure how to justify my presence. "I'm Patty, Sarah's mother," I said, extending my hand with a warm smile. "It's lovely to meet you both." Mrs. Richardson shook my hand politely, but I noticed the brief look she shared with her husband. It was subtle, but after 65 years of living, you learn to read people. I saw how her gaze swept over my dress, my shoes, my simple jewelry. My face burned with shame. The conversation went on for a few more minutes, mostly about Grant's recent projects and Sarah's job at the marketing firm. I tried to chime in once, saying how proud I was of Sarah's accomplishments, but Grant quickly redirected the topic away from me. When the Richardsons eventually moved on to socialize with other guests, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. "Jesus Christ, Mom!" Grant hissed in my ear as soon as they were out of range. His fingers dug into my elbow hard enough to hurt. "What were you thinking?" I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your clothes. Your whole look. Do you have any idea how important tonight is for my career?" His voice was low but dripping with venom. "Mr. Richardson is deciding on promotions next month, and you're standing there looking like—" "Like what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Like the cleaning lady," he finished cruelly. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me, but she didn't speak up for me. She just stood there, her face red. not with outrage at her husband's cruelty, but with embarrassment at me. "Grant, please," I began, but he wasn't done. "I can't have you wandering around talking to my colleagues, representing our family looking like that. It reflects badly on Sarah and, by extension, on me." He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. "There's a kitchen in the back where they're setting up the buffet. You're going to go there and stay there until this event is over." I stared at him, stunned. "You want me to hide in the kitchen?" "I want you somewhere you won't embarrass us any further," he said flatly. "Sarah and I have worked too hard to build our reputation here for you to ruin it in one night." I turned to my daughter, hoping she would say something, anything, to defend me. But Sarah just looked away, her silence louder than any words. "Mom," she murmured, still avoiding my eyes. "Maybe it would be better if you stayed out of sight for a bit, just until the important networking is done." The betrayal was complete. My own daughter, the child I had raised alone after her father died when she was only 8, was choosing her husband's career over her own mother's dignity. Grant didn't wait for my answer. He took my arm again, gentler this time, but still with that same unyielding grip, and steered me through the crowd toward the back of the venue. A few people glanced our way with mild curiosity, but no one spoke up. If anything, they probably assumed I was a staff member being led to the service area. The kitchen was alive with motion. Caterers in white jackets moved with practiced precision, assembling gorgeous dishes in what looked almost like a choreographed performance. Grant exchanged a few quick words with a man who appeared to be the head chef. The chef nodded and pointed toward a small side room off the main kitchen. "You can wait in here," Grant said, opening the door. Inside was a cramped storage space cluttered with stacked chairs and cleaning supplies. "Someone will let you know when it's time to leave." I opened my mouth. But he was already gone, leaving me standing alone in that stuffy little room with nothing but my humiliation and the muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses coming from the party beyond the kitchen walls. I sank onto one of the folding chairs, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. In 65 years of life, I had endured plenty of humiliations. People had judged me for being a single mother, for working as a housekeeper, for not having a college degree. But nothing had prepared me for this, being hidden away like a shameful secret by my own family. Sitting in that cramped room surrounded by mops, buckets, and stacks of unused chairs, my mind drifted back to a little boy I had once cared for many years earlier. Marcus had been only 7 when I started working for his family, a shy, quiet child with large brown eyes that always seemed to be searching for someone who would truly see him. His parents, the Thornans, were wealthy executives who traveled constantly for business, leaving Marcus in the care of a rotating list of nannies and housekeepers. By the time I arrived at their grand home in the upscale neighborhood of Riverside Heights, Marcus had already gone through 4 different caregivers in 2 years. I can still picture the first time I saw him. He was hiding behind the sweeping staircase in the foyer, peeking around the banister at me with a mix of curiosity and wariness. When I knelt down and asked if he wanted to help me bake cookies, something in his face softened and lit up. It was as if he'd spent his entire short life waiting for someone to invite him to join in, instead of just watching from the sidelines. From that day on, Marcus and I were inseparable whenever I was on duty. While I cooked and cleaned, he sat at the kitchen counter doing homework or simply talking about his day. He told me about the kids at school who teased him about his secondhand clothes. His parents believed in building character through modest allowances despite their wealth. He confided in me about feeling invisible in his own home, swallowed up by his parents' meetings, trips, and social events. Somewhere along the way, I became far more than a housekeeper. I became the mother figure he'd been craving. I went to his school plays when his parents were away. I cheered for him at his little league games, blending in with the other parents who just assumed I was another mom on the bleachers. When he woke from nightmares, he would sneak downstairs to find me, and I would hold him until he calmed down and drifted back to sleep. The memory of Marcus's trust and unconditional affection stood in brutal contrast to what I was feeling now, locked away like a stain by my own daughter and her husband. Sitting alone in that storage room, I realized something important. Sometimes the truest family isn't the one you're born into or the one you marry into. It's the one you build through genuine love and respect. And right now, that kind of family felt painfully distant. The noise from the party bled through the walls, a soundtrack of clinking glasses, music, and cheerful voices. Each burst of laughter felt like a small cut, another reminder that I wasn't welcome in my daughter's new world. But deep inside, beneath the layers of hurt and exhaustion, something began to stir. A memory of who I used to be, of strength, of dignity, of the woman I had once been before I allowed other people's opinions to shrink me. With that memory came the faint shape of an idea, a phone number I hadn't dialed in far too long. It belonged to someone who might still remember the version of me I had almost forgotten, the woman who deserved respect, not pity. Alone in that cramped room, with only the distant clatter of dishes and the murmur of kitchen staff beyond the door, I found myself drowning in memories I had tried to bury. The familiar ache in my chest reminded me of all the other times I'd been made to feel small, invisible, not enough. But tonight was different. Tonight, the wound was inflicted by Sarah, the daughter I had given everything for. I closed my eyes and let myself go back to the beginning. Sarah was 8 when our world shattered. Her father, my husband David, died in a construction accident on a Tuesday morning in October. One moment I was packing his lunch, kissing him goodbye at the door. The next, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room being told that the man who had been my anchor for 10 years was simply gone. The life insurance payout was small, $12,000. It barely covered the funeral and a few months of bills. I had been a stay-at-home mom, with no degree and no real work experience, but I had an 8-year-old girl who needed food, a roof, and some sense of security. So I did the only thing I could. I became a house cleaner. It was hardly glamorous, but it paid $25 an hour in cash, and many of the families had children around Sarah's age, which meant I could sometimes bring her along during school vacations. Sarah despised it from the start. She hated the sharp smell of cleaning products clinging to my clothes, and she was mortified when her classmates' mothers turned out to be my employers. "Why can't you get a real job?" she asked when she was 12, her voice laced with that casual cruelty only a child can manage. "Jennifer's mom works in an office and wears nice clothes. She doesn't have to scrub other people's toilets." I remember how her words pierced me, but I also remember forcing myself not to show it. Instead, I calmly explained the bills we had to pay, the small college fund I was trying so hard to build for her, and the sacrifices we sometimes make for the people we love. She rolled her eyes and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. That became our pattern for years. The older Sarah grew, the more ashamed she seemed of the work I did. She lied to her friends about my job, saying I worked in domestic services, as if the fancy wording somehow erased the reality. She refused to let me attend parent-teacher conferences in my work clothes, insisting I change into something normal, even if it meant I'd arrive late. By the time she was in high school, our relationship was strained to the breaking point. Sarah was thriving socially, accepted into the honor society, a cheerleader, dating the football quarterback. She was carefully constructing the kind of status my job threatened to undermine. I became her hidden embarrassment, the mother she acknowledged only when absolutely necessary. The irony was that during those years, when Sarah was learning to be ashamed of me, I was forming the most meaningful connection of my adult life, my bond with Marcus Thornton. I started working for the Thornton family when Marcus was 7, the same year Sarah entered high school. The contrast between the two children couldn't have been sharper. While Sarah was pulling away from me, desperate to distance herself from what she saw as my failure, Marcus was moving toward me, hungry for the kind of affection his wealthy but emotionally absent parents couldn't give. The Thornton mansion was a 45-minute drive from our small apartment, but the pay was excellent. $200 for 8 hours of work, 3 days a week. Mrs. Thornton, a sharp-featured woman who worked as a financial consultant, had made her expectations clear from the start: professionalism and discretion above all. "We travel frequently for business," she explained during my interview, her manicured fingers tapping against a polished mahogany desk. "Marcus is a quiet child. He won't be any trouble. He's very independent for his age. We just need someone to maintain the house and make sure he's fed and safe when we're not here." What she didn't mention was that frequent travel meant they were gone more often than they were home, or that 7-year-old Marcus was so starved for attention, he would sit at the top of the stairs for hours, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice him. I'll never forget the first time I saw him there, perched on the top step like a tiny guard. His small face was pressed between the balusters as he watched me dust the foyer below. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, as if he'd been caught misbehaving. "Hello there," I called gently. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "Well, hello, Marcus. I'm Patty. I'll be helping take care of the house while your parents are away." I climbed a few steps toward him, moving slowly so I wouldn't scare him. "Are you hungry? I was just about to make some lunch." He nodded eagerly, and I saw the loneliness written all over his big brown eyes. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and found it filled with expensive organic food, most of it requiring actual cooking, something that clearly wasn't happening often. There were a few frozen meals, some fruit, but no signs of anyone preparing real home-cooked food for this child. "What do you usually have for lunch?" I asked as I checked the cabinets. "Sometimes Mrs. Peterson makes sandwiches," he said, referring to the previous housekeeper. "But she didn't like to cook." I understood immediately. Mrs. Peterson had probably done the bare minimum to keep him fed and safe, but not the kind of nurturing a child his age needed so desperately. "Well, I love to cook," I told him, rolling up my sleeves. "How would you like to help me make homemade mac and cheese?" His whole face lit up like I'd just offered him the greatest gift in the world. For the next hour, we worked side by side in that gleaming kitchen. Marcus carefully measured milk and cheese while I handled the pasta. He talked non-stop about school, his teacher Miss Williams, his favorite dinosaur book. As we cooked together, I learned that Marcus spent most of his time alone, entertaining himself with books and educational toys while his parents put in 14-hour days or flew off to business conferences. He had a nanny who picked him up from school and stayed until 6, but she sounded more like a supervisor than a companion. "Do you miss your mom and dad when they're gone?" I asked softly as we waited for the mac and cheese to bake. He shrugged, but the sadness in his eyes told the truth. "They're usually gone anyway. Even when they're home, they're in their offices or on phone calls." My heart ached for this little boy who had everything money could buy, but none of what truly mattered. In many ways, he reminded me of Sarah at that age. Except where Sarah had been angry about what we lacked, Marcus seemed resigned to having everything except love. That first day set the tone for our relationship. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I arrived at the Thornton house at 8 a.m., and Marcus would already be in the kitchen, dressed and waiting, ready for whatever small adventure we might create together. While I cleaned, he followed me from room to room, helping with little tasks and filling the silence with endless questions and observations. I realized he was remarkably bright for his age, reading far above grade level and showing a natural gift for math that his parents barely seemed to notice. His teachers had recommended gifted programs, but his parents were too busy to attend the meetings or fill out the forms. Little by little, I began taking on more responsibilities in Marcus's life. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it was obvious how much he needed someone who genuinely cared. I started arriving earlier in the mornings so I could make Marcus a real breakfast before school. Eggs, toast, oatmeal, anything better than the sugary cereal he usually gulped down on his way out the door. I packed him healthy lunches with little handwritten notes tucked inside, just like I used to do for Sarah when she was small. When his parents traveled, which was at least 2 weeks out of every month, I stayed overnight at the house so he wouldn't be alone. During those stretches, our bond deepened even more. We cooked dinner together, watched movies curled up on the couch, and I read to him at night before tucking him into bed. all the tender, everyday things his own parents were too busy to offer. The contrast with my relationship with Sarah during that time was devastating. While I was pouring maternal love into Marcus, my own daughter was drifting further and further away from me. She had started dating Grant in her junior year of high school, and he quickly became yet another source of shame about my job. I can still see the first time he came to our apartment to pick her up. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom place in a working-class neighborhood, furnished with hand-me-down couches and garage sale tables. When I opened the door, this well-dressed young man stood there with his expensive car parked at the curb. I saw the judgment in his eyes instantly. "You must be Sarah's mother," he said politely, but his gaze slid past me, scanning the worn furniture and dated decorations with thinly veiled disdain. "Please, call me Patty," I replied, offering my hand with a smile. "Sarah's told me so much about you." He shook my hand briefly, his grip limp, his interest clearly elsewhere. When Sarah appeared behind me, dressed in her prettiest outfit and practically glowing, Grant's entire demeanor shifted. He turned charming, attentive, all smiles, for her. I faded into the background like I didn't exist. That never changed. During the 5 years they dated and the 5 years they've been married, Grant has treated me as an inconvenience at best and an embarrassment at worst. Little by little, Sarah began to see me through his eyes. The final blow came tonight, in that kitchen, when my own daughter chose her husband's cruelty over defending the mother who had given up everything for her happiness and success. Sitting in that storage room, surrounded by cleaning supplies that felt like symbols of all my years of hard work, I understood that Sarah had never truly seen the sacrifices I'd made. She had never witnessed the late-night budgeting sessions where I stretched every dollar, the times I skipped buying clothes for myself so she could have the trendy things her friends wore, the extra shifts I picked up to cover her tuition. Most painfully, she had no idea how often I'd turned down chances at my own happiness to keep her life stable. There had been a man, Robert, whom I met when Sarah was 16. He was a supervisor at one of the office buildings I cleaned, a kind widower with grown children. He treated me with respect and genuine warmth. He asked me out to dinner more than once, and I began to feel something for him that I hadn't felt since David died. But Sarah was at a critical point in her life, applying to colleges, planning her future, and I worried that bringing a man into our home might disrupt her sense of security or add more stress. So I kept finding reasons to say no, turning down Robert's invitations until, eventually, he stopped asking. I've often wondered what might have happened if I had chosen my own happiness just that once. But at the time, it felt obvious. Sarah's needs had to come first. I told myself there would be time for my life later, once she was settled and safe. Now, at 65, I'm starting to understand that later may never come. Sarah is stable, successful, and married, and instead of gratitude or even basic respect, what I've received in return is rejection and humiliation. The cruel irony is that during those years when I was sacrificing my own happiness for Sarah's future, I found another kind of fulfillment with Marcus. He valued me. He cherished my attention. With him, I felt like the kind of mother I had always wanted to be. In that storage room, wiping tears from my cheeks with a crumpled napkin I dug out of my purse, I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Marcus before his family moved away, when he was 15. We'd spent 8 years together, 8 years of watching him grow from a lonely little boy into a confident, kind teenager. "I'll never forget you, Patty," he said. His voice, thick as movers, bustled around us. "You saved me. You made me feel like I mattered." I cried that day, not only because I was losing Marcus, but because I was losing the one relationship where I had always felt seen and appreciated. He promised we'd stay in touch, and for a while we did. But time and distance do what they always do. Our contact faded to Christmas cards and birthday messages. Now, alone and humiliated, I found myself wondering what had become of that sweet boy who once made me feel like the most important person in the world. Somewhere in my purse was a phone that still held his number. I had saved it through every upgrade, transferring it from phone to phone, but never found the courage to actually call. Tonight, for the first time in years, I was seriously considering reaching out to the one person who had loved me without conditions, because right now, I needed to remember what that felt like. My hands shook as I pulled the phone from my bag, the dim light from the single bulb casting shadows across the cracked screen. I had carried Marcus's number with me for 8 years, updating it faithfully but never pressing call. What would I even say? How do you bridge 8 years of silence? How do you reach out to a boy you helped raise when your own daughter has just pushed you aside? The sounds of the party drifted through the kitchen walls. Laughter, clinking glasses, conversations about promotions and quarterly results. Grant's world, a world where it was painfully clear I did not belong. But sitting there surrounded by mops and cleaning products, I realized I was done letting other people decide my worth. I was done being invisible, done being ashamed, done pretending my feelings didn't matter. Marcus had always seen me. Even at 7 years old, he looked at me like I was someone deserving of love and respect. Maybe, just maybe, that hadn't changed. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, Marcus Thornton. Underneath was a California number I could only hope was still his. My finger hovered over the call button for what felt like forever. What if he didn't remember me? What if he had his own family now, his own life? What if 8 years had erased everything we once shared? Then I thought about Grant's cruel words, about Sarah's silence, about the way both of them had looked at me like I was something that needed to be hidden. I thought about all those nights I'd held Marcus after his nightmares, the school plays and games I'd gone to when his parents were too busy, all the times I'd been the only person in his world who truly cared whether he was happy. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I braced myself for voicemail when a familiar voice finally answered. It was deeper now, a man's voice, but it was still him. Hello? For a moment, no sound came out of my mouth. It was Marcus, but not the little boy in my memories. Marcus, I whispered at last, barely audible. There was a pause. I could hear office noise in the background, phones, distant conversations. I'm sorry, who is this? He asked politely. My heart sank. Of course he wouldn't recognize my voice after so many years. It's Patty. Patty Morrison. I used to work for your family when you were... Patty! The change in his tone was instant and unmistakable. The formal, professional edge vanished, replaced by pure, stunned warmth. Patty, oh my God, I can't believe it's really you. Tears stung my eyes at the affection in his voice. Hello, sweetheart. I hope I'm not bothering you. I know it's been a long time. Bothering me? Are you kidding? I could hear movement, like he was walking somewhere quieter. I've thought about you so many times over the years. I wanted to call, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. Hang on a second. I heard a door close. When he spoke again, his voice sounded closer, more private. Mom. My heart almost stopped. God, it's so good to hear your voice, Mom. He used to call me that sometimes when he was small, usually when he was scared or hurt and needed someone to hold on to. Hearing it now, from the grown man he'd become, was almost too much. I'm sorry for calling out of nowhere, I said, wiping at my cheeks. I needed to hear a friendly voice tonight. You never need to apologize for calling me, he said firmly. Are you okay? You sound upset. Even after all these years, he could still read me. That old connection hadn't been erased by time or distance. I started to say I was fine, the automatic lie I'd perfected over the years. But this was Marcus. I had never lied to him as a child, and I wasn't going to start now. I'm not okay, actually. I'm having a really hard night. What's wrong? Where are you? I'm at a party. Well, technically, I let out a bitter little laugh. I'm locked in a storage room at a party. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Locked in a storage room? His voice sharpened instantly. Patty, what's going on? Are you safe? I'm safe, I said, just humiliated. And then it all spilled out. I told him about Sarah's invitation to Grant's company event, how excited I'd been to be included, how carefully I'd chosen my dress. I told him about Grant's cruel comments about my appearance, and finally about the moment my own daughter sided with her husband's ambition instead of her mother's dignity. Marcus didn't interrupt once. He just listened, his breathing growing heavier as I described each fresh humiliation. When I finished, there was a long silence. "What's the name of the company?" he asked at last, his voice controlled in a way that made me suddenly alert. "Richardson and Associates," I said. "Grant works in their marketing department. Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. It felt charged somehow, like something important was shifting just out of sight. "Patty," Marcus said slowly, "I need to ask you something. I want you to answer honestly." "Okay," I said, confused. "This man, your son-in-law, has he treated you badly before tonight?" The question startled me. "Well, yes, but—" "How often?" he pressed. "Marcus, I don't understand why you're asking—" "Please," he said gently, but there was steel underneath. I could hear the same determined tone he used to have as a boy when he insisted on helping me with chores, even when I told him it wasn't necessary. "Tell me how he's treated you." So I did. I told him about 5 years of subtle digs and slights, about being left out of family gatherings, about watching Grant slowly turn Sarah against me. I told him about the birthdays and holidays I'd only heard about after the fact because the guest list was limited, about how he changed the subject whenever I tried to join a conversation, about the constant underlying message that I just didn't measure up to their world. "And Sarah just lets this happen?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anger now. "She loves him," I said quietly. Yet as I said it, even I wasn't sure if love was enough to excuse her complicity. "And I understand why she's embarrassed," I went on quietly. "My background, my work. I'm not educated. I'm not sophisticated." "Stop." The word cut through my sentence like a knife. "Don't you dare talk about yourself like that," Marcus said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Don't ever let me hear you minimize your worth again." The fierce protectiveness in his tone reminded me so much of the teenager he'd been when he left, the same boy who once got into a fight at school to defend a younger student from bullies, then cried afterward because he was afraid I'd be disappointed in him for fighting at all. "You are the most valuable person I've ever known," Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me what love really is, what sacrifice looks like, what it feels like when someone believes in you unconditionally. You saved my life, Patty. You literally saved my life." "Marcus," I began. "No, let me finish. Do you remember when I was 13 and my parents were getting divorced?" Of course I remembered. Their separation had been bitter and ugly, stretching on for nearly 2 years. Marcus had been pulled back and forth like a rope in their tug-of-war, his emotional health sacrificed to their legal strategies. "You remember how I started having those panic attacks?" he said. "How I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus at school?" I remembered all too well, those dark months when it felt like he was fading right in front of me, becoming a ghost of the bright, curious boy I had once known. His parents were so wrapped up in their court battles, they barely noticed their son was falling apart. "You're the one who found me that night," Marcus said quietly. "When I took all those pills from my mother's medicine cabinet. You're the one who called 911, who rode in the ambulance with me, who stayed at the hospital when my own parents were too busy with depositions to visit their suicidal son." The memory slammed into me. I had tried for years to push that night out of my mind. The shock of walking into his room to say goodbye for the day, only to find him unconscious on the bed, surrounded by empty pill bottles. The terror, the shaking hands as I dialed emergency services, the frantic ride to the hospital, the endless hours praying in the waiting room. "You never left my side," Marcus went on. "When the doctors said I needed therapy, you're the one who found a counselor and drove me to every appointment. When my parents were too busy fighting each other to fight for me, you stepped in, you saved me, and then you helped me heal." "You were just a child going through something horrible," I said, my voice breaking. "Any decent person would have done the same." "No," he said firmly. Not any person. Most people would have seen a troubled teenager and backed away. You saw a child who needed love and you gave it. No conditions, no judgment. You never made me feel like a burden or a problem. You just loved me. By then, we were both crying. The years between us seemed to evaporate, leaving only the bond we'd always shared. "Where are you now?" I asked softly. "Are you happy? Do you have a family?" "I'm in San Francisco," he replied. "I never married, never had kids. I've been too focused on building something, on trying to become worthy of what you did for me." "What do you do?" I asked. He paused, and when he answered, there was a strange edge to his voice I couldn't quite place. "I run a company," he said. "A consulting firm that specializes in corporate restructuring and efficiency analysis." "That sounds very impressive," I said, genuinely proud. "I'm so happy for you." "It is impressive," he replied, and I could hear a small smile in his tone. "We work with some of the largest corporations in the country, helping them identify issues in their management, their employee relations, their corporate culture." "You always were brilliant," I told him. "Even as a little boy, you saw patterns and solutions adults completely missed." "I learned that from you," he said. "You taught me to watch how people treat others, especially people they think have less power. You taught me that how someone treats the people who work for them reveals everything about their character." Something in his voice made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite say why. "Marcus, why are you asking all these questions about Grant and the company?" He went quiet again. This time, the silence stretched. "Patty," he said finally, "I need you to tell me the address of this party. I want to make sure you get home safely." "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to worry about that," I said. "I can just take a taxi." "Please," he said, and I heard the same stubborn determination I used to see when he marched around the house insisting on helping with chores. "Just tell me where you are." I gave him the name and address of the hotel where the event was being held, still not understanding why he sounded so focused on my ride home. "Stay right where you are," he said. "Don't go back into that party. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed, and don't you dare apologize to anyone for being exactly who you are." "Marcus, I don't understand." "You will," he replied, and I heard movement on his end, the sound of a door opening, footsteps. "I'm on my way." "You're coming here?" I asked, stunned. "But it's at least an hour's drive from San Francisco, and it's already 9:30 at night." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. There was something in his voice that sent a chill through me. Not a fearful one, but the kind you get when you know something big is about to happen. 20 minutes? How is that possible?" "Because, Mom," he said, and now the love in his tone was tangled with something else. Anticipation, maybe. "I'm already in the building." The call ended, leaving me alone in that little storage room, my heart pounding and thoughts racing. Already in the building? What did he mean he'd be there in 20 minutes? And why did I suddenly feel like the entire course of my life was about to shift? I looked around at the cramped space that had been my prison for the last hour. For the first time since Grant had shut the door on me, I didn't feel ashamed anymore. I felt something completely different now. A rising sense that the little boy I had once protected was now a man who was about to protect me in ways I never could have imagined. I sat in that storage room for exactly 18 minutes, staring at the clock on my phone and replaying Marcus's words in my head. How could he already be in the building? And why had he said he'd be there in 20 minutes if he was already on site? The confusion was almost as intense as the relief. For the first time that night, I didn't feel utterly alone. Somewhere in this building was someone who truly cared about me, someone who still remembered my worth, even when I had forgotten it myself. At exactly 9:52, there was a soft knock at the storage room door. "Patty?" Marcus's voice came through the thin wood, and my heart leapt. I stood quickly, smoothing my dress and running my fingers through my hair. After 8 years, I was about to see the boy I'd helped raise, now fully grown. I was nervous, excited, and terrified all at once. I opened the door and gasped. The Marcus standing there was nothing like the 15-year-old I remembered. He was tall, at least 6'2", with broad shoulders filling out an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. His brown hair was cut shorter, styled neatly, and the soft roundness of his teenage face had sharpened into strong masculine lines. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always seen straight through me, were exactly the same. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. Before I could respond, he wrapped me in a hug so strong it lifted me off my feet. I buried my face in his shoulder and sobbed, not the bitter, humiliated tears I'd been crying all evening, but tears of relief and joy. This was my boy, my Marcus, and he was here. "Look at you," I whispered when he finally set me down, my hands automatically reaching up to smooth his hair, just like I used to when he was small. "You're so handsome, so grown up. I can't believe it's really you." "I can't believe it either," he said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "God, I've missed you." "I've missed you too, sweetheart. Every single day." I studied his face, marveling at the man he had become. "You look so successful, so confident. I'm so proud of you." Something flickered in his expression. Pride, yes, but shaded with something else I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said, glancing around the cramped storage closet with obvious distaste. "But not here. No one should ever have to have a serious conversation in a place like this. Marcus, I'm not supposed to leave this room. Grant said—" "Grant," Marcus repeated, and there was an edge to his voice that startled me. "Yes, we definitely need to talk about Grant." He offered me his arm with an old-fashioned gentleness. "Will you trust me?" I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had once stared up at me from beneath a mop of messy hair, full of trust, and nodded. "Of course I trust you." We left the storage room together, walking through the bustling kitchen where staff glanced curiously in our direction. Marcus moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside to let him pass. "Where are we going?" I asked as he guided me into a side corridor. "Somewhere private where we can actually talk," he said. "There's a small conference room on this floor that should be empty." "How do you even know about conference rooms in this hotel?" I asked. He gave me a small, almost secretive smile. "I know a lot of things, Patty, more than you might think." The conference room he chose was elegant but intimate, a polished mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city lights outside. Marcus closed the door behind us and motioned for me to sit. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just want to look at you," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "I still can't believe you're here. When you said you were in the building, I figured you were invited to the party as someone's guest." "I'm not a guest," Marcus said quietly, taking the chair across from me. "Patty, there's something I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me before anyone else tries to explain." Something in his tone made my stomach twist with anxiety. "What is it?" He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table between us. "Do you remember what I told you on the phone about the company I run?" "Yes. You said you do corporate consulting, restructuring and efficiency analysis." "That's true," he said, "but it's not the whole truth." He drew in a steadying breath. "My company is Thornton Strategic Solutions. We're one of the largest management consulting firms on the West Coast. We specialize in identifying problems in corporate culture, issues like employee mistreatment, hostile work environments, and a lack of management accountability." I nodded slowly, still not understanding why this seemed so heavy for him to share. "Patty, Richardson and Associates hired my firm 6 months ago." The words hit me like a punch. "They what?" "They've had serious problems with employee retention," he continued. "Multiple HR complaints about a toxic work environment and rumors of discriminatory practices. They brought us in to do a full evaluation and recommend changes." My head spun. "You mean you've been working with Grant's company?" "I've been investigating Grant's company," Marcus corrected gently. "And tonight, I'm here in a professional capacity, to observe their leadership team in a relaxed social setting. It's a standard part of our process. We like to see how executives behave when they think no one important is watching. I stared at him, trying to take it all in. You've been here all evening? I arrived about an hour ago, he said. I've been mingling with staff, watching how people interact, taking notes. His jaw tightened. Including your son-in-law's behavior toward both employees and family. Oh no, I whispered, mortification washing over me. You saw what happened? I saw enough, he said grimly. I saw a man who thinks his position gives him the right to humiliate and isolate anyone he considers beneath him, Marcus said. Someone who lacks the basic human decency any company should demand from its employees, let alone its leadership. I buried my face in my hands. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you would be here. No idea you would see. Patty, look at me. His voice was gentle but firm. When I lifted my head, his eyes were blazing with an intensity I'd never seen before. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Do you understand? But the way he treated me, the way I let him, the way you let him what? Marcus cut in. Exist in your family, love your daughter, try to be part of their lives even though they've shown you over and over again that you're not welcome. You've done nothing wrong. He's the one who should be ashamed, not you. Tears burned my eyes again. I just wanted to be a good mother-in-law. I wanted Sarah to be happy. And what about your happiness? Marcus asked quietly. When was the last time anyone in your family asked about that? The question hung between us. I didn't answer, because we both already knew. I need to tell you something else, Marcus went on. Something I saw tonight that goes beyond how he treated you. What do you mean? I've been watching Grant with his colleagues all evening, he said. I saw him snap at a young intern for spilling a bit of wine on his shoe. I watched him make inappropriate comments to several female employees, and I saw him steal credit for a project that was clearly done by the people under him. His tone shifted fully into professional mode, crisp, measured, analytical. This man isn't just a bad son-in-law, Patty. He's a liability to any company that keeps him on. My heartbeat quickened. What are you saying? I'm saying my report to Richardson and Associates is going to include a very thorough assessment of Grant's character and behavior, and based on what I've seen tonight, including how he treated you, my recommendation will be that he is not fit for any leadership role in a company that claims to value ethics and employee well-being. I stared at him. You're going to recommend they fire him? I'm going to recommend that HR take a very close, formal look at him, Marcus replied coolly, with particular attention to how he treats subordinates and whether he actually lives the company's stated values. A faint professional smile curved his lips, calm but ice-cold. What they choose to do with that information is up to them. But Marcus, if Grant loses his job, that affects Sarah too. Their mortgage, their lifestyle. That will be their problem to solve, Marcus said firmly. Patty, you cannot keep putting the well-being of people who treat you like dirt ahead of your own. You can't keep sacrificing your dignity for people who wouldn't lift a finger to protect yours. He was right, and I knew it. But the instinct to shield my daughter from consequences, even ones she had helped create, was hard to silence. There's something else, Marcus added, his voice softening a little. Something I need to ask you. What is it? How long has it been since someone stood up for you? He asked. Since someone looked the people hurting you in the eye and told them their behavior was unacceptable? The question hit harder than I expected. I thought back over the years, the small humiliations, the little dismissals, the slow erasing of my place in my own daughter's life. Through all of it, I'd been alone, making excuses for behavior that never should have been excused, accepting treatment no one should have to endure. I can't remember, I whispered. Marcus reached across the table and took my hands in his. His hands were strong now, capable, but his touch was as gentle as when he was 7 and afraid of thunderstorms. That ends tonight, he said. I'm here now, and I'm not going to let anyone treat you like that ever again. Not Grant, not Sarah, no one. Marcus, you can't. I can, he interrupted. I'm not a powerless kid anymore, Patty. I have resources, I have influence, and most importantly, I have the ability to make sure that anyone who hurts you faces real consequences. I looked at this man who had once been my lonely little boy, and what I saw took my breath away. Marcus had become exactly the kind of person I'd always hoped he would: strong, successful, principled. But more than that, he still had that fierce loyalty that had always been his most beautiful trait. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Marcus glanced at his watch. "Now we go back to that party. I have a few people I still need to meet, a few observations to finish." His smile turned sharp and determined. "And Grant is about to get a very memorable lesson in consequences." "I don't think I can face them," I admitted. "Not after the way they looked at me, the way Sarah just stood there while he humiliated me." "You won't be facing them alone," Marcus said as he stood and offered me his arm again. "I'll be right beside you, and I promise you this, by the end of tonight, everyone in that room will know exactly how valuable you are." As we walked toward the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: absolute certainty that someone truly had my back. Marcus had grown into my protector just as I had once been his, and I had the strange, steady feeling that Grant was about to learn what it's like to go up against someone who cannot be intimidated, dismissed, or locked away in a storage closet. Walking back into that ballroom on Marcus's arm was like stepping into a completely different world. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead, the same elegantly dressed guests still mingled with champagne in hand, but everything felt different because this time I wasn't alone. Marcus moved through the crowd with quiet authority, nodding to people he had clearly spoken with earlier, his hand resting protectively on my elbow. I spotted Grant near the bar, holding court with a cluster of colleagues, his face animated as he told some story that had them all laughing. Sarah stood beside him, smiling, totally unaware that her life was about to tilt on its axis. "Remember," Marcus murmured in my ear, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." I drew in a breath, squared my shoulders, and lifted my chin. The navy dress Grant had mocked suddenly felt like a kind of armor. It was simple, modest, and bought with money I'd earned through honest work. There was absolutely nothing shameful about that. "Mr. Thornton," a voice called from across the room. I turned to see Mr. Richardson and his wife approaching, the same couple who had looked at me with polite disdain earlier in the evening. "Mr. Richardson," Marcus replied smoothly, reaching out to shake his hand. "Thank you again for inviting me to observe tonight. It's been very enlightening." "I hope you've been able to get the insight you need for your assessment," Mr. Richardson said. Then his gaze landed on me, confusion flickering in his expression. "I'm sorry, but haven't we met?" "This is Patty Morrison," Marcus said, before I could answer. "She's very important to me." My cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment this time, but from pride at the affection in his voice. I also noticed he hadn't actually defined our relationship. Mrs. Richardson was studying me carefully now, trying to reconcile the woman she'd brushed off earlier with someone Marcus clearly held in high regard. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, extending her hand again but with a different tone. "How lovely to see you again." "The pleasure is mine," I replied, shaking her hand with a confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. "Patty raised me," Marcus said simply. Both Richardson's eyebrows shot up. When my biological parents were too absorbed in their own lives to notice their son was drowning, she stepped in and saved me. She taught me everything I know about loyalty, integrity, and what it actually means to care for another human being. His words settled over us like a warm blanket. I watched Mrs. Richardson's expression change completely. Her social mask dropped, replaced by something genuine. "How wonderful," she said, and this time her smile was real. "You must be incredibly proud of what Marcus has achieved." "I am," I said, looking at him, the boy I'd once tucked into bed, now a powerful man. "But I'm not surprised. He was always exceptional." "Mr. Richardson," Marcus continued, "I was hoping to speak with you before I leave. I have some preliminary observations I think you'll find interesting." "Of course," Mr. Richardson said, Shall we go up to a conference room? Actually, Marcus glanced around the room. It might be more valuable for you to see some of the dynamics I've been tracking in context. Would you mind if we talk here, in the middle of the social setting? Mr. Richardson looked intrigued. Certainly. What did you have in mind? Marcus's gaze shifted across the room and locked onto Grant. I'd like to talk about leadership and how it shows up when people think no one is really watching. For example, how a manager treats people they perceive as having less status or power. That's an excellent metric, Mr. Richardson agreed. Character is often most visible in unguarded moments. Exactly. Marcus's voice had the calm authority of someone used to being heard. For instance, I observed one of your marketing managers tonight displaying some troubling behavior. My heart started pounding. I understood what he was doing now. He wasn't going to limit his criticism to a private report weeks later. He was about to confront Grant's behavior in front of his boss, with me standing right there. Which manager? Mr. Richardson asked, his tone sharpening. Grant Morrison, Marcus said. Hearing my married name in that context sent a jolt through me. He's married to Mrs. Morrison's daughter. Mr. Richardson's eyes widened as he put the pieces together. I watched him exchange a look with his wife, and I knew they were both remembering how they'd dismissed me earlier. What specific behaviors did you observe? Mr. Richardson asked carefully. Marcus pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He really had been taking notes. At approximately 8:45, he began, I saw Mr. Morrison verbally attack a young woman who appeared to be an intern after she accidentally spilled a small amount of wine on his shoe. His language was completely inappropriate for any professional context, and his tone suggested a pattern of bullying subordinates. Mr. Richardson's expression hardened. I see. What else? At 9:15, Marcus continued, I watched him take credit for what was clearly another employee's work while speaking to a potential client. When the actual project lead tried to clarify their contribution, Mr. Morrison cut them off and redirected the conversation. He flipped to another page, his voice still calm, almost clinical, but what he was doing felt like a controlled demolition of Grant's reputation. But perhaps most concerning, Marcus said, was his treatment of a family member. The room around us seemed to fade as my pulse roared in my ears. At approximately 9:30, I saw Mr. Morrison escort an older woman, his mother-in-law, into a storage room off the kitchen and lock her inside because he was embarrassed by her appearance. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Richardson looked from Marcus to me, his face moving through shock, disbelief, and then anger. He locked a family member in a storage room? Mrs. Richardson whispered, her hand flying to her chest. His mother-in-law, Marcus confirmed, his gaze steady on mine, full of fierce loyalty. The woman who raised his wife alone after her husband died, who worked multiple jobs so her daughter could go to college, who has never asked for anything but basic respect and inclusion. My eyes burned again, but this time with gratitude, not shame. Someone was finally saying out loud what I had spent years swallowing. Where is Mr. Morrison now? Mr. Richardson asked, his voice tight with contained fury. Marcus nodded toward the bar, where Grant was still laughing with his colleagues, blissfully unaware. Would you like to see how he behaves when he's held accountable? Marcus asked. Mr. Richardson straightened his tie, his jaw set. Yes, he said. I would. What happened next felt like something out of a movie, except it wasn't scripted. It was real, and I was standing in the middle of it. Hold your head high. I straightened my back and lifted my chin. The navy dress Grant had called inappropriate suddenly felt like armor. It was clean, modest, and paid for with money I'd earned through honest work. There was nothing disgraceful about that. Mr. Thornton, a voice cut across the room. I turned and saw Mr. Richardson approaching with his wife, the same couple who had looked at me earlier with polite, distant disapproval. Mr. Richardson, Marcus replied smoothly, offering his hand. Thank you again for allowing me to observe tonight. It's been very enlightening. I hope you've been able to gather what you need for your assessment, Mr. Richardson said. Then his eyes landed on me, confusion crossing his face. I'm sorry, but haven't we met? This is Patty Morrison, Marcus said before I could speak. "She's very special to me." Heat rose to my cheeks, not from shame this time, but from pride at the warmth in his voice. I noticed he still hadn't defined our exact relationship, and that detail clearly intrigued them. Mrs. Richardson looked at me more carefully now, her expression thoughtful instead of dismissive. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, holding out her hand again, "how lovely to see you." "The pleasure is mine," I replied, taking her hand with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. "Patty raised me," Marcus said simply. Both Richardson's eyebrows shot up. "When my biological parents were too busy with their own lives to notice their son was drowning," he continued, "she stepped in and saved me. She taught me everything I know about loyalty, integrity, and what it truly means to care for another person." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I watched Mrs. Richardson's polite smile soften into something genuine. "How wonderful," she said, and this time there was real feeling behind it. "You must be incredibly proud of what Marcus has accomplished." "I am," I said, looking at him. "The same boy I once comforted after nightmares, now a powerful man. But I'm not surprised. He was always exceptional." "Mr. Richardson," Marcus said, shifting the focus, "I was hoping to have a brief conversation with you before I leave. I have some preliminary observations I think you'll find significant." "Of course," Mr. Richardson replied. "Shall we go upstairs to a conference room?" "Actually," Marcus glanced around the ballroom, "I think it might be more useful if you see some of the dynamics I've observed right here, in the social environment where they naturally occur. Do you mind if we talk here?" Mr. Richardson looked intrigued. "Certainly. What did you want to discuss?" Marcus's gaze tracked across the room and locked onto Grant. "I'd like to talk about leadership," he said. "Specifically how it shows up in informal settings. For example, how a manager treats people they believe have less status or power." "That's an excellent evaluation lens," Mr. Richardson agreed. "Character often shows itself most clearly in relaxed moments." "Exactly." Marcus's voice carried quiet authority. "For instance, I observed one of your marketing managers tonight displaying some highly concerning behavior." My heart thudded in my chest. I knew exactly where this was going now. He wasn't going to bury this in a report. He was going to confront it head-on. "Which manager?" Mr. Richardson asked, his tone tightening. "Grant Morrison," Marcus said. Hearing my last name attached to Grant in that context sent a jolt straight through me. "He's married to Mrs. Morrison's daughter," Marcus added. Mr. Richardson's eyes flicked between me and Grant, and I could see the realization settle over him. "What specific behaviors did you observe?" he asked carefully. Marcus pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He really had been documenting everything. "At approximately 8:45, he began calmly, "I witnessed Mr. Morrison verbally berate a young woman, likely an intern, for accidentally spilling a small amount of wine on his shoe. His language was unacceptable in any professional context, and his tone strongly suggested a pattern of bullying behavior toward subordinates." Mr. Richardson's expression darkened. "I see. Anything else?" "At 9:15, Marcus continued, "I observed him claiming credit for what was clearly another employee's work while speaking with a prospective client. When the actual project lead tried to clarify their contribution, Mr. Morrison cut them off and redirected the conversation." He flipped to another page, voice still neutral but devastating. "But what concerned me most," Marcus said, "was his treatment of a family member." You could feel the air around us tighten. At approximately 9:30, I saw Mr. Morrison escort an older woman, his mother-in-law, into a storage room near the kitchen and lock her inside. The reason, as stated by him, was that he was embarrassed by her appearance. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Richardson stared at Marcus, then at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and disgust. "He locked a family member in a storage room?" Mrs. Richardson whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "His mother-in-law," Marcus confirmed. His eyes met mine with fierce protectiveness. The woman who raised his wife alone after losing her husband, who worked multiple jobs so her daughter could go to college, who has asked for nothing from them but simple respect and inclusion. Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they were born of gratitude, not humiliation. "Where is Mr. Morrison now?" Mr. Richardson asked, his voice like a tightened wire. Marcus nodded toward the bar, where Grant was still laughing loudly with his colleagues, completely oblivious. "Would you like to see how he behaves when held accountable?" Marcus asked. Mr. Richardson straightened his tie, his jaw set. "Yes?" he said. "I would." What followed felt like a scene from a film, except this time I was standing in the center of it. Marcus, with my arm tucked in his, walked us toward Grant, with Mr. and Mrs. Richardson flanking us like a small, focused procession. Grant was mid-brag about some client win when he noticed our approach. "Mr. Richardson!" he exclaimed, his face lighting up with that same eager-to-impress expression I knew too well. "What a pleasure. I was just telling everyone about the Henderson account and how we—" "Mr. Morrison," Mr. Richardson cut in, his tone cold, formal. "I understand you've been entertaining your colleagues this evening." "Well, yes, sir," Grant said, thrown off by his boss's tone but still forcing a smile. "It's been a wonderful event. Really brings the team together." "It certainly reveals character," Mr. Richardson said. "I'd like you to meet someone." Grant's gaze slid to Marcus with polite interest, then landed on me with visible irritation. "This is Marcus Thornton," Mr. Richardson said. "He's the CEO of Thornton Strategic Solutions, the firm we hired to evaluate our corporate culture." The blood drained from Grant's face so fast I thought he might collapse. His eyes darted between Marcus and Mr. Richardson as if scrambling for a script. "Mr. Thornton," he stammered, reaching out a hand. "It's an honor to meet you. I had no idea you were here tonight." Marcus looked at his hand for a long moment, then didn't take it. "I'm sure you didn't," Marcus replied, his tone icy but polite. "I've been observing employee interactions all evening. Very educational." Sarah appeared at Grant's side, her face pale as she sensed something terrible unfolding. "And this," Mr. Richardson added, gesturing toward me, "is Mrs. Morrison. I believe you know her." Grant's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His colleagues had gone quiet, watching the scene with a mix of curiosity and dread. "Hello, Grant," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Mom," Sarah breathed, staring at me, horror and confusion battling in her eyes. "I understand you had concerns about Mrs. Morrison's appropriateness for tonight's event," Marcus said, his tone conversational but his gaze razor-sharp. "That's not—" "There was a misunderstanding," Grant stammered. "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated calmly. "Is that what you call locking your mother-in-law in a storage room because you were ashamed of her clothes?" You could feel the entire circle tighten. Conversations around us died out. People leaned in, listening. "That's not— I didn't mean—" Grant's face was now beet red, sweat beating at his temples. "What did you mean?" Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the noise. "When you told the woman who raised your wife as a single mother, who worked as a housekeeper to pay for her education, who has shown your family nothing but love, that she looked like the cleaning lady and was an embarrassment to your reputation. What exactly did you mean by that?" Each word landed like a blow. Grant looked desperately from one colleague to another, searching for support and finding only shock and disapproval. "Marcus, there's been some kind of mistake," Sarah said weakly. "The only mistake," Marcus replied, turning to her, "was made by people who forgot that basic decency isn't optional, no matter someone's background, income, or wardrobe." Mr. Richardson stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. "Mr. Morrison, considering what I've learned tonight about your treatment of both employees and family, I believe it would be best if you cleared your office first thing Monday morning." Grant went ghost white. "Sir, please, if you'll just let me explain—" "There's nothing to explain," Mr. Richardson said firmly. "A man who would publicly humiliate his own mother-in-law and lock her away as though she were something shameful is not someone I want representing this company." The ring of people around us had widened. I saw phones being lifted discreetly, recording what would no doubt be retold in that office for years. Grant turned to Sarah in panic, but my daughter's eyes were on me now, with shock, and something else that looked a lot like dawning realization. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Richardson said, turning toward me with genuine respect, "I owe you an apology. When my wife and I met you earlier, we didn't recognize who you were or the importance of your presence here." "You couldn't have known," I said, trying to be gracious, even as I marveled at how quickly everything had turned. "Actually, we could have," Mrs. Richardson interjected, her voice thick with regret. "We could have taken the time to speak with you properly, to show simple courtesy to another human being, regardless of what we assumed about you. I'm ashamed of how we behaved." Marcus slipped an arm around my shoulders, drawing me close, his posture both protective and proud. "Mrs. Morrison raised me when my own parents were too self-absorbed to notice that their son was collapsing," he said, addressing not just them, but the whole circle of onlookers. "She taught me that character isn't measured by wealth or title, but by how you treat people who can't necessarily do anything for you in return. She saved my life, and she helped make me the man I am." He turned his gaze directly on Grant, his voice calm but final. "Anyone who would treat a woman like this with disrespect has told me everything I need to know about their character, and that is not the kind of character I will ever recommend keeping in any workplace I consult for." Grant opened his mouth again, but no words came out. He looked around at the circle of faces, some disgusted, some pitying, and I saw the exact moment he realized his carefully constructed world had just collapsed. For the first time in 5 years, I felt truly defended. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Marcus's home in San Francisco, watching him knot his tie before heading to the office. Morning light streamed through the big windows, filling the room with warmth. This house had become my refuge, a place where I was wanted, respected, and loved. A place where I wasn't an embarrassment, but exactly what Marcus always called me, with a smile that never failed to make my eyes sting. Family. "You don't have to make breakfast every morning," Marcus said, adjusting his collar in the reflection of the stainless steel fridge. "Mrs. Chen is more than capable of handling the cooking." "Mrs. Chen is wonderful," I replied, flipping the pancakes on the griddle. "But she doesn't make them the way you like them. And besides, this is our time. Once your day starts, you barely have a minute to breathe." He smiled, that same soft, warm smile that had once belonged to a 7-year-old boy asking if he could help me bake cookies. "I've got some news," he said, settling onto a stool at the kitchen island. "The Richardson case is officially wrapped. The culture audit is done, and they've implemented all our recommendations." "And Grant?" I asked, even though part of me didn't really want the answer. "Still unemployed as far as I know," Marcus said calmly. "Word gets around quickly in corporate circles. When potential employers call for references and hear what happened at that party," he lifted a shoulder in a half shrug, "let's just say his reputation shows up before he does." I set a plate of pancakes in front of him, along with the real maple syrup he'd loved since he was a child. My feelings about Grant's situation were complicated. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, but there was a quiet sense that, for once, consequences had finally caught up with someone who had run from them for years. "Sarah called yesterday," I said softly, taking the chair across from him. Marcus paused mid-cut, looking up, his expression guarded but attentive. "How is she?" "Struggling," I answered. "The divorce was finalized last week. She's moved into a much smaller place. She's working 2 jobs now, her regular marketing position and weekend shifts at a retail store." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "She sounds different. Humbled, I suppose." "Are you going to see her?" he asked. It was the question I'd been turning over in my mind for weeks. Since that night at the party, Sarah had been calling regularly, her messages growing more frantic as her marriage unraveled and her financial safety net disappeared. At first, her calls were full of anger. She accused me of destroying her life, of ruining her marriage, of being vindictive and selfish. But as reality settled in, her tone began to shift. The fury gave way to something else, regret, and what sounded like genuine remorse. In our last conversation, she had done something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. She admitted she was wrong. "I think so," I said at last. "I'll see her, but not to save her. Not to patch everything up and pretend nothing happened." Marcus nodded, clearly approving. "What changed your mind?" "Something you told me that first night," I said, stirring my coffee. "That I couldn't keep sacrificing my own dignity to protect people who wouldn't do the same for me." I looked down at my cup, watching the ripples fade. But I also realized that doesn't mean I have to shut my heart down completely. Sarah is my daughter. She made awful choices and she hurt me deeply. But she's also someone who was manipulated by a man who knew exactly how to prey on her insecurities. "That still doesn't excuse how she treated you," Marcus said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But it helps me understand it." I glanced up at him, this remarkable man who had become everything I'd dreamed he could be. "And you taught me something important too?" He tilted his head. "What's that?" "That family isn't just about blood or obligation," I said. "It's about choice, about deciding who you love and support because they matter to you, not because you're required to." I reached across the island and squeezed his hand. "You chose me as your family when you were 7, I said. "And you chose me again at 32. That means more to me than anything else ever could." His eyes shone with emotion. "You saved me first," he said softly. "We saved each other," I replied. The doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet morning. Marcus frowned and checked the time. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said, getting up to answer it. Curiosity tugged at me, so I followed him to the entryway. When he opened the door, Sarah was standing on the front step. She looked smaller than I remembered, uncertain, almost fragile. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain blouse. In her hands she clutched a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite. I was surprised she'd remembered. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't have any right to just show up like this, but I was hoping we could talk." Marcus stepped aside, his face calm and unreadable, but not hostile. Sarah's gaze shifted to him, and I saw her swallow hard. "Marcus," she began, "I owe you an apology. What I allowed Grant to do to my mother was unforgivable. I'm ashamed that it took losing everything for me to see how wrong I was." He studied her for a long moment. "The apology you owe isn't to me," he said gently. Sarah nodded, tears spilling over as she turned back toward me. "Mom, I don't even know where to start," she choked out. "What Grant did to you that night, what I let him do for years, there's no excuse for it." "No," I said quietly. "There isn't." But my voice was soft, not harsh. "I was so focused on fitting into his world," she continued, "so desperate to be the kind of wife he wanted that I forgot who I was. I let him convince me that you were an embarrassment, that where you came from reflected badly on me." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "But you weren't the embarrassment, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "I was. I was ashamed of the sacrifices you made for me instead of being grateful for them." I felt my eyes fill with tears as I listened. These were the words I had been hoping to hear for years. "I threw away the most important relationship in my life for a man who turned out to be cruel and selfish," Sarah went on, "and I don't know if I can ever make that right, but I want to try, if you'll let me." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just see the polished, status-obsessed woman she had become. I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching her teddy bear and whispering her dreams and fears into the dark. That little girl was still there, buried under years of bad decisions and misplaced priorities. "It's going to take time," I said at last. "I can't just erase the last 5 years or pretend what you did didn't hurt." "I know," Sarah said quickly. "I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm just asking for a chance to prove I can be better, to be the daughter you always deserved." Marcus cleared his throat quietly. "I should let you two talk," he said. "I'll be in my office if you need me." As he walked away, I felt a surge of gratitude. He had given me the strength to stand up for myself, but he also knew when to step back and let me handle my own heart. "Come in," I told Sarah, stepping aside. We sat in Marcus's cozy living room, the bouquet of daisies resting on the coffee table between us like a fragile peace offering. For a few long minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, just heavy, full of all the things we didn't quite know how to say yet. "This house is beautiful," Sarah said eventually, glancing around at the warm decor and framed photos. Marcus had insisted on displaying pictures from our past, snapshots of him as a child, of us baking, laughing, celebrating small milestones, evidence of the family we had built by choice, not by blood. "Marcus has been very generous," I said. "He invited me to live here after that night at the party. He told me he'd spent too many years without his family close, and he wanted to fix that." "He calls you family," she said softly. "He calls me Mom," I answered. "He has since he was a boy." Sarah's face crumpled. "I threw that away, didn't I? The right to be called your family." "You threw away the privilege of taking it for granted," I corrected gently. "But the chance to earn it back? That's still there if you're willing to do the work." "What kind of work?" she asked. I leaned forward. "The work of rebuilding trust, showing me you value me for who I am, not who you wish I was. Learning that love isn't about controlling people or shaping them into some acceptable version." Sarah nodded through her tears. "I'll do whatever it takes. I've already lost so much. I don't want to lose you too." "You haven't lost everything that matters," I said softly. "You've lost the things you thought mattered, but didn't." "Your job is still there, isn't it?" "Yes," she said, "but it's been awkward since Grant was fired. I can tell some of my coworkers are wondering if I share his values." "Then show them you don't," I said. "Show them you've learned something from all this. Show them you're committed to treating people with respect, no matter what they earn or where they came from." We talked for another 2 hours. Slowly, the stiffness faded, and our conversation began to feel more natural. Sarah told me about her new reality, having to budget, choosing between what she wanted and what she could actually afford, learning to live without the constant cushion of luxury. She admitted how lonely her small apartment felt, how much she missed the security of her old life, but not the version of herself she'd been living that life as. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she said as we started to wind down. "Maybe social work or counseling. I want to do something that actually helps people instead of convincing them to buy things they don't need." "That sounds meaningful," I said, and I truly meant it. "Would you—" She hesitated, fiddling with the edge of a napkin. "Would you maybe like to have dinner sometime next week? Nothing fancy, just pizza or something simple. I'd like to hear more about your life here, about what makes you happy." I looked at her, this woman who had caused me so much pain, but who now seemed sincerely committed to changing, and I made a decision that scared me and comforted me at the same time. "I'd like that," I said. When she left, clutching the scrap of paper with my phone number like it was something precious, I went to find Marcus. He was in his office, reviewing documents for his next consulting assignment. "How did it go?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. "It was a beginning," I said, sitting down across from him. "Not a full resolution, but a beginning." "Are you okay with that?" "I think I am," I said slowly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I have options. I can choose to forgive her, gradually, on my own terms. I can choose what kind of relationship I want with her. I can choose to protect my peace and still stay open to the possibility of reconciliation." Marcus smiled. "Those sound like healthy choices." "I learned from the best," I replied, glancing around at his diplomas and awards. "You know, I spent so many years feeling like I'd failed as a mother just because my own daughter was ashamed of me. But when I look at you, the man you've become, the way you've built your life on principles instead of just profit, I think maybe I didn't fail after all." "You didn't fail at all," Marcus said firmly. You taught me that love doesn't depend on status or success. You taught me that character matters more than credentials. You taught me that the real measure of a person is how they treat others, especially people who can't do anything for them. He paused, then added, and you taught me that family is something you build, not just something you're born into. So, what happens now? He asked. I thought of Sarah's uncertain smile, the hard work ahead of rebuilding trust, the possibility of truly mending things with my only child. I thought of Marcus's steady love, the safety and respect I'd found under his roof, the family we had created out of choice and loyalty. Now, I said, feeling lighter than I had in years, I get to live as the woman I always was on the inside, valued, cherished, surrounded by people who actually see my worth. I get to be a mother to you, the way I've always been. And if Sarah proves she's serious about changing, maybe I'll get to be a mother to her again too, this time on terms that honor us both. And if she doesn't? Marcus asked gently. Then I'll be sad, I admitted. But I won't be destroyed, because I've finally learned something important. My worth doesn't depend on whether other people recognize it. I'm enough, exactly as I am. Marcus stood and came around the desk to hug me, just like he used to do when he was little and needed comfort. Yes, you are, he murmured. You always were. Wrapped in that embrace, in the quiet warmth of a home where I was truly treasured, I understood something clearly. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in convincing others to see your value. It's in remembering it yourself and refusing to settle for anything less than real love and respect. The little boy whose life I'd once saved had grown up and saved me right back. Maybe my daughter would learn to value me again. Maybe she wouldn't. But either way, I knew I would be okay. Because for the first time in a very long time, I was finally, truly home. And now I'm curious about you, the one who has stayed with me through this story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever lived through something like this, being treated as less than by your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, I've left 2 more of this channel's favorite stories on the final screen, both with twists you won't see coming. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.